How's it, everybody? Welcome to Talk Story Sessions. I got Richard Ng here today with Indigidao. Glad to have him on the show. We're just gonna talk story a little bit about what he's been up to and how things are going with utilizing technology in the nonprofit space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mahalo, Skylar, for being here. Richard in here with Indigidao, and excited to talk about blockchain and especially being in Hawaii, how we can use that to help preserve culture and preserve the Aina. And I think there's a lot of cool stuff that you're doing as well, Skylar. So interested to just talk story, man.
Yeah. So I just for everybody here listening, could you just kind of go over your origin story, kind of how you kind of like stumbled upon tech, how you stumbled upon the nonprofit path, and where you kind of originated from? Let's just start from there.
Definitely. Mahalo. Yeah. So actually, I grew up over here on Oahu. I grew up in Kuli'o, so it's over there, before Hawaii Kai. Yeah, born and raised, graduated from Punahou class of '97, and went to the continent for college. So I ended up at University of Washington, which is really interesting because it's like a tech hub now. But I was a creative writing major actually in college.
Okay.
When I went there, it was around the time that Amazon was starting up, and Silicon Valley was going through its first iteration, and yeah, I was just like around it and tech adjacent, and a lot of my friends who I grew up with from Hawaii as well too were becoming engineers, electrical engineers. They were getting into coding, but I was more interested in like actual writing. So I wasn't interested in tech yet. But then I had actually moved down to the Bay Area after college, and again, just being completely immersed in it. I still wasn't involved in it. I was working in nonprofit space, but I was in education. So I helped set up a charter school out there. I was actually the PE teacher, and then I did 1 year with San Francisco Unified, and that was like really my emphasis. It was like, okay, I love education policy, so I decided to get my master's. Took a couple of years off, went to the University of Arizona, got my master's in public policy, public administration, and that's where I really got involved in the nonprofit space. And actually, that was my first introduction to like actual like tech infrastructure. In our public administration, public policy program, we're looking at data mining, and this was 2004. So we're looking at data mining. Apps were coming online. Facebook started, I think, around that time, 04, 05, and I think YouTube was coming along online too. So there was like more interest in that, and I was like, okay, what's going on? Because coming from the Bay Area and I was going to Arizona, I was like, okay, maybe this is someplace I should like start to, be aware of or be in. But I was emphasizing on education. Moved back to the Bay Area, fell in love, and then I stayed up there, still up there. So born and raised, but in the Bay Area now. And I was in education. And then at one point I was like, okay, I want to, see if this skill set can transfer over to the for-profit space. And then my current wife, my wife, not my current wife, my wife right now, we had a bunch of classmates from college who were all going to Berkeley, and they were getting their PhDs in computer science. So it was really interesting. So I got even more immersed, and then I was like, okay, I might have to figure out a way to get into the tech space. And a bunch of them started their own companies. Some are billion-dollar companies now. And we had a good friend, and he actually gave me one of my first positions, and I wanted to do my own consulting in the social impact space. So how can I bring the skills over from public sector to the for-profit? And then, he had a startup, and he was doing optical recognition and translating, written documents and digitizing it. And it was a big organization, and he had a really great, support system. He was backed by some pretty solid VCs, and I was starting to do social impact consulting in like the tech space. So then through that, I started to get involved more in the civic tech space. So I left education, and then I had always some interest in local government because, I always feel like local government was a place where, citizens are impacted daily by the services. And there's a nonprofit called Code for America. They're based out of San Francisco. Yeah. So they were like
They actually have one here, like a cohort here that they
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, so they had like an initiative. It's kind of like the brigade system where citizens would, essentially run their own community-driven organization, but work with their municipality and develop. So I was volunteering with the Oakland Brigade called Open Oakland, and we were working with the city of Oakland, and we were actually like citizens were building projects. So the city would actually contract out with citizens to do digital solutions and digital services. Yeah, so I was on a project called Canna Equity, And it was interesting. This was when the cannabis industry was coming online, and the city needed a digital solution for their licensing, but there was a whole social equity component. So what they would do is they would match the large enterprise business license holders with social equity operators, essentially citizens who were negatively impacted by the war on drugs, and they were giving them priority in their business space. And the idea was, let's match them, and hopefully, knowledge can be shared. Yeah, so we created a bunch of like literally citizens and people created a whole solution to help match this. It got deployed in their licensing process. And that was my first time kind of really doing like product dev, user testing, user research, all from a citizen perspective. So it was an interesting convergence of, my experience in local governance, technology, working in nonprofit. And I was like, okay, cool. This is an interesting space. I was wondering what more there could be. And I really wanted to just like, stay in that space. I ended up working in the cannabis space after that, actually doing more similar work, social impact. And then I started to work for a SaaS startup. It was all focused on supply chain, and
those were all private companies.
Those are all private companies, yeah. So it was a private company, but in the cannabis space, it's very like heavy on compliance. Okay. And actually, there's mandated kind of like what they call traceability systems. So one of my good buddies now, he actually developed a blockchain solution to help with the tracking, the traceability. So it says from seed to sale, and he was doing like smart packaging, all that. Wow. That's when I got introduced into blockchain, and I was like, oh, this is some interesting utility, like this whole infrastructure for supply chain. This is probably right around when COVID was happening too. So supply chain was a big thing. Where's all your sourcing coming from? And the startup I was with, we were really interested in kind of like helping, users visualize their whole supply chain. But we were interested on like, oh, if there was some transparent solution where all this data on the user end could be seen, how could we do that? And we kept researching blockchain more. Unfortunately, that startup kind of, it ended its life cycle, but it was a great experience for me. And then right after that, I called one of my buddies up. I was like, hey man, I need a job. And he's like, oh, I got a great project. And it's the organization is New Mexico Community Capital, which is who I'm working for now. Okay. Like, we're gonna do this blockchain project. Okay. And you want to be a program manager? That's my buddy Henry Jake Foreman. I was like, yeah, I'm interested. And this is what led to Indigidao now. So long story, short, but it was a combination of, the public sector, social impact, and, like supply chain that got me into blockchain. And I got introduced to it in like very unique ways. But it was all through nonprofit and community, which is, what I loved. And, Skylar, I hope we talk about kind of the summit, because I feel like the space you're helping create in Hawaii and blockchain is very unique. It's community focused, and all that whole experience, I feel like Hawaii is the place to really grow blockchain, the intention around it. And I don't know, I feel kind of like my journey kind of like, even though it wasn't linear, it's always going to come back to community. And uniquely enough, Hawaii that's what we're, it's all about. So blockchain is a perfect place in Hawaii.
I appreciate that, it's really, that's really interesting to kind of unpack all that. So you kind of, you started off in the community space, and then you went to the for-profit space, startup. That's a really exciting time to be, especially in the Bay Area, right? Yeah. With everyone's trying to do a startup, and they're trying to make it. And I'm trying to think back, because I went to school out in the Bay Area. Yeah. So I did my 4-year undergraduate out there, out on the peninsula. So near Stanford area. So
oh yeah,
San Mateo.
Yeah.
Anyway, so everybody's always got their startup. They're trying to pitch, and they're trying to do get money, and it's just that vibe, right? You get that bug from other people, and then you kind of want to do your own thing, and it's like and it's like the tech influence on everything. Not it just goes into every aspect of, you know what I mean? And that's what I think is really the builder mindset, But anyway, coming back to bringing it back home with the summit, Ellen, shout out Ellen. She always pulls through with these huge events for Hawaii blockchain community. And and I think it's really important for us to highlight these other things, not on the financial aspect of things. I feel like it gets people attracted to this space, right? Because of the monetary incentive that it gives to people, and people start to realize what it actually is and how it can be used. You mentioned the supply chain, right? From seed to sale. It's really interesting, and I think back during that time period, that was when NFTs were kind of a popular thing, and
Oh
people
yes.
were saying like, this is going to be the future. This is this and this and this, and supply chain tracking, and everybody's trying to say that, but no, nothing really happened for any
Nothing
of
happened.
that.
Yeah.
Of course, it's like the best use case scenario for it, right?
Yeah.
Blockchain. Nobody's utilized it in the way that it was intended. I guess most people thought it would be used for.
Yeah. And I love it. And going back to like, it's interesting, especially when we're at the summit. And I think it was interesting because actually MetaMask founder was there, Aaron, right? And
Aaron, yeah.
and I feel like I live in the Bay Area, so everyone's like, oh, what is the biggest thing in blockchain that comes next? And for me, it's like, well, we just need people to adopt wallets. Like, okay, the big thing is, okay, get a wallet, and then we can start to build out the infrastructure from there. So I'm always like, okay, what is the big thing? But like in Hawaii, there's so many different utility. And I think you brought up a good thing with the supply chain and the uniqueness of the culture here, right? So, hunting is a great example. I'm also thinking macadamia farms, Kona coffee, the Hawaii brand is such a big thing. So even like the made in Hawaii, like
Exactly.
label, like how do you express that now? Like, with just different supply chains, again, from all over the world creating products, but like, what is uniquely Hawaiian? Like, like how do you really track that? And again, I think the original intention of blockchain being fully transparent, using that again as back-end infrastructure, that's a unique thing. So I love hearing about that, and at least there's still ideas, and especially, with the USD, I guess, like, if they still get funding, I don't know, but but like, it's like
Yeah, so they have agents here that exclusively do that. So they have to bring them on the hunts with them
that is
to
so
when they
interesting.
harvest the meat and stuff. So they tell them what animals to actually they say, oh, is this animal good? Okay, they look, see, okay, yeah, okay. Then they evaluate at what time like they shoot it and all this kind of stuff. So it, in turn, like
I love that.
you're basically writing this information to a database, right?
Yeah.
And once you have that, you can start doing automations and
Yep.
like have it so that, okay, when this thing happens, it'll timestamp it.
Yeah.
And so it helps the business itself streamline their workflow more. And like, say for tracking purposes, if they do ever have a recall on a product, they can be like, okay, all these batches are not good.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it kind of, there's a lot of things that you can be utilizing this stack, but it's getting the people to adopt the platform at first. Going back to the whole wallet thing, we got to reduce the friction for a lot of people. Once you start talking about blockchain, this and this and this, people get like confused. It's too much jargon for them to kind of comprehend, and then they kind of just close down, they shut down, you know what I mean? They don't want to, they're just like, I don't understand it, I am out.
Yeah, that's what's interesting too, Skylar, about like being in the nonprofit space and doing work around emerging technology. For the nonprofit we're with and through the Indigidao program, a little bit more Indigidao too.
Okay, cool.
For Indigidao, like again, the organization we're housed in is focused on Indigenous economic development, community development. So when I got approached, the hypothesis of the project was, can you use blockchain technology to create democratically governed economic cooperatives? And the DAO was the structure associated, a decentralized autonomous organization.
Let's unpack that.
Yeah.
What did you say though?
Can we use emerging technologies to create democratically governed economic cooperatives? So the idea is, especially we were focused on entrepreneurs and the values behind it, especially Indigenous communities. What does economic sovereignty look like? How do you economically empower a community to essentially govern themselves over, their own economies? And what if a community had their own ability to create their own currency? What would that look like as well? And we were specifically focused on entrepreneurs, for various reasons, because a lot of entrepreneurs have barriers to participate in larger markets. It's hard being an entrepreneur, right? So there's sometimes lack of support systems. So essentially, if you could all work together, you get a community of entrepreneurs, share resources, share knowledge, ingest resources, and have a say, essentially like a community governed fund. What is the technology behind that infrastructure? And that's where, when again, going back to like the early stages of blockchain, with NFTs and tokens, DAOs were, a thing. So we're like, oh, could a DAO have more of an impact utility as opposed to governing a token or a meme coin or something, can there actually be social utility for this that can help create economies? So that was our hypothesis, and actually we got funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So big foundation, and we're part of their Pioneering Ideas Initiative. And they're really focused on equitable futures. What does that look like? So they were interested, again, in the possibility of, can you really empower communities to create their own structures that they govern? So again, it was like, okay, sovereignty, kinship, and reciprocity. And going back to what we were talking about, like how do we adopt this? So being in the nonprofit space, there's so much education around this that is needed.
Right.
Like the organization focused on indigenous economic development. They work with a lot of farmers, and we were thinking about, okay, what communities could we deploy this structure in, where they're already kind of like doing collaborative efforts. And when we talk about the DAO, there's similar structures, right? There's co-ops, collectives, grassroots movements, where people come together around a mission. They're aligned values-wise, and they want to work together. So there's other structures. So again, our hypothesis was like, okay, well, can we add a tech layer on this to these, essentially community governed structures, and have that be an engine to help them create more infrastructure, to ingest resources? Again, if there's a token involved that represents this economic activity, can that be a way where, you get more resources allocated? So it was interesting though, we would talk to some farmers and in rural New Mexico, and we'd be like holding a focus group or something, and we'd be like, hey, what do you guys think about blockchain? Talking to farmers about blockchain, that conversation is dead on arrival. Right. So again, I think like going back to wallets and adopting this, or getting people and the community now onboarded onto blockchain and what the utility is, we have to go back to the values. So we have to talk about sovereignty again. We have to talk about kinship, how do we work together, and essentially the whole, like, what do you need to make this community sustainable? And then we introduce blockchain as a tool. So I feel like, again, going back to the summit, that's where I love this conversation happening in Hawaii, because it is community focused here, and you have to think about the bigger picture. You have to think about the impact on the land. You have to think about, how's this going to affect everyone? You can't just deploy a solution. It has to be community focused, and I feel like that's where we are right now in blockchain. Yeah, it's kind of like there's a whole cycle of hype, NFT, what we were just talking about.
Right.
But now there's actually real life utility that can happen with this infrastructure. But the larger community still doesn't get it. So, like, it's a lot of onboarding and education. And I feel that's an interesting space to be in with the nonprofit and emerging tech. And I know that you all got like a 501c3 coming up. So perfect, again, vessel for all of this, right? The summit is a perfect vessel to educate, bring community, and essentially create a movement around all of this. And you can still talk about complex things like blockchain, but from a community perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody actually came up to our table at the summit, and they're into crypto, and then they kind of were asking us like, what is our whole deal with this thing? What are we trying to do? And when we tell them like we're education based, we're just trying to educate community and bring them kind of like up to speed. And our whole thing is to build the community up and bring them into the next digital ecosystem.
Love that, man.
This whole type of economy, digital economy online, right?
Yeah.
And so we told them that, and then they were like super surprised, and they said like this is kind of like a thankless job, because it's like nobody is willing to pay for that information.
Right.
What I mean? They're like, maybe the people that are really into it, they're really interested in it, but a lot of people don't even know what it is to be interested about.
Yeah.
So you're selling this idea to them before they even know how it can help them, and it's like it's hard. It's like a chicken and egg kind of deal, like
exactly.
And to get to that level of understanding what it is, you have to obviously custody your own crypto, know how to buy it, know what even a blockchain is. It's a lot of stuff to know.
It's a lot, man.
And so I don't know. It's we started this nonprofit up, Pupukai Tech, and we're trying to basically, like I said, bring up the underserved communities, locals here in Hawaii, into the digital age. That's kind of our whole thing. And basically, we're just kind of we're pretty bootstrapped.
I love it, man.
Yeah, so
I love it, dude.
We're just starting up, and we're focusing more on the blockchain aspect, because a lot of, I think the companies are willing to give grants for these types of things if we build these types of solutions, right? And especially if we try to incorporate the local community, like you said, that's really something that I think hasn't been really, you know, emphasized enough.
Again, I think you nailed it, and probably what you're going to find more as the organization grows. Congratulations on that as well too.
Thanks.
And I love the emphasis is on education and awareness, because that's going to be the full life cycle of this. It's always going to be educating until there is the point where there's mass adoption and there is some awareness on, like, okay, yeah, this is again what a blockchain is. Someone can like define that. The person on the street can define it or understand it, or they've interacted with it, or even if they haven't, then they understand. There's access points to that conversation. But again, what's interesting? I gotta keep coming back to Hawaii, because a big thing over here is there's a lot of, again, different utilities around it outside of finance. Even though that is something, right? You just go back to the way that the island was originally divided, right? The Ahupua'a system. It was decentralized, right? It was decentralized resource management system for Kanaka Maoli, from the mountains to the sea.
Right.
So that idea alone, and there were probably ledgers, right? In different forms. Like, that knowledge base is already, it's built into the DNA, literally into the island here. So these concepts, it's almost like when you educate communities, like, okay, how do we get a point of reference for them to understand? And that's the interesting thing about being in Hawaii. The indigenous culture here, the indigenous knowledge base, right? The traditional ecological knowledge, it already existed. The Ahupua'a was already here.
Right.
That is exactly like, that can be a point of reference on using blockchain. And again, like we talked about supply chain with the hunters, farming. How do you identify, like, nutrients in soil? I think that is an advantage for adoption for blockchain, is if you're in an environment with land stewardship, or you're working with the farmers, the mahi'ai, because these concepts are already, again, inherently a part of what they've been doing for forever.
Right.
It's
something they can relate to already.
It's something. Yeah, well, a big thing that we say for Indigidao is indigenous culture is the original source code.
Okay.
So a lot of what we do in Indigidao now, we've done the blockchain, we've engaged different communities, we've adopted, it's become almost like a philosophy. And how do communities assess and adopt technology, right? So again, it's almost like the education, the awareness is so important before we even talk about the technology, right? Just having the willingness to even look at innovations, or say, okay, this is what our community needs. So we do have the willingness to explore this. There is a vision for the future. What are our tools now?
Okay.
So it's been interesting, because the DAO started off as that decentralized autonomous organization, but it really has become a philosophy around technology for us. And
Wow.
again, why I think, I always joke about, oh yeah, this has to be the simulator, man. Like, why else would I have grown up in Hawaii and be adjacent or in blockchain now to help build this infrastructure, where I truly believe an island and a culture can be the place where this flourishes.
Right.
It has to be in somewhere like Hawaii. Or on our panel, we had Edwin, who's Tongan, and he's doing all these amazing things in his tech hub, educating people all over Pacifica, right?
Right.
And like original kinship technologies, right? The stars to navigate,
Right.
these things, again, going back to knowledge base. If you frame it like that, an innovation, then blockchain isn't crazy. It just makes sense. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I really love that analogy you use, where the ancient Hawaiians were the kind of innovators with the stars, and doing the Apua system, and the sovereignty of Hawaii. Right, that's really what it is, and the whole ethos of crypto, blockchain, the decentralized nature of that. It makes sense.
Exactly.
I really love that analogy, and I think I'm gonna use that.
Oh yeah, please do, because again, I think for mass adoption, before it's like, okay, now you go sign up for a wallet, right? It's like, okay, again, what is the framing of the conversation? What is the impact on the individual, their community? I think we kind of all have to have that, kind of like awareness, because, essentially we're all going to be represented digitally in some form, right? Like, we already are.
Right.
It's just going to be more amplified, even more so. So essentially a digital ID is another way you talk about it. It's like, like, how are you represented online? How's your community? Your data is already being utilized in something way. Do you want to protect that? Do you want your own sovereignty over that? Again, there's a tool for that. Hey, blockchain, let's explore that. So
Right.
these conversations, it has to come from the community. It has to come from a place where you know there's a vision, and there's, again, the willingness to see how can we move forward as a community. And again, it's just a tool. It's just infrastructure, although it is like cryptography, and there is some other things
Yeah.
as well too. But
It's pretty like interesting coming from that angle of like knowing so much about the tech stack, and then you come back out to try to relate to other people in the community and teach these other people. I always have to like take myself out of the weeds and be like, okay, this is too complicated for most people. Like when we're talking about these things, it's like you know um there is a higher level to like the technical understandings of like, how the blockchain works and stuff like that, but we still always have to bring it back home, like you said, give those like hard hitting like realizations for people, especially to reference them back, to reality, right? Why does this even matter, right?
100%. And bro, it's like, this is why we need the devs like you to work in community and be in community, so you understand that, right? And I feel like I'm not a developer. At most of my life, I was like, I'm not even a technologist. I was tech curious. I was tech adjacent. When I shared my career, like, I was in these regions where tech was being developed, but I was just more a user. But when I understood, okay, there is a convergence of technology as a solution for the community. Okay, this makes sense. But I need developers, right, that I work with and who understand the community like yourself. I think we were talking about the amazing art project by Dana Yeho, right? And vanishing NFTs, right? And I think
Vanishing murals.
Yeah, vanishing murals, and it's like, that is a perfect utility for that, right? It combines sustainability, conserving and protecting nature, but a really complex technology to code with, which I'm amazed again that you're the back end developer on that, and respect, because it's such a beautiful project, and it's a perfect example of this, right? Where you can converge community, art, technology, sustainable, and stewardship. It is almost a perfect use case of what the future could look like with this.
I appreciate that.
It's beautiful, man. I love it.
Let's talk a little bit more about Indigidao.
Yeah.
How did that, like, what is the structure like, and how does the governance work, and a little bit more about the technical side of it.
Yeah. So interesting when we talk about structure too. So we were a fiscally sponsored program in a 501c3. So um, that hypothesis originally of, could we use emerging technologies or Web3 to create these democratically governed economic cooperatives, that was already challenged from the board of directors, because we had to be a true DAO and be on chain using a protocol. We had to deploy an institutional wallet.
Interesting. Okay.
Because we wanted to basically apply for grants, and we wanted to ingest that and put it straight into the wallet, and then all the members kind of vote on it. So for the DAO, right? Again, it's a structure. So it stands for decentralized autonomous organization. Just for everyone, But again, there's similar types of structures. So I think I talked about cooperatives and collectives, right? So a DAO is a way for communities to govern themselves, make decisions around resources. Again, and I think the original first iteration of DAOs, when people saw it, there was a lot of money being generated around these tokens.
Right. I think so, it's like MakerDAO.
Yeah. MakerDAO is a big one. My favorite DAO that I followed was called Cabin DAO, and essentially it started with a group of people who loved hiking, and they needed a place to stay. So they're like, why don't we pull over all our resource and buy a cabin? They did that. And then they set up a DAO, and then it became like, okay, let's invite more people, and then if they want to, come and use this cabin, then they'll buy into our DAO, and they eventually, they become a steward of DAO. It became a whole global network.
Oh wow.
Of people setting up cabins all over the place, and essentially they were all on chain. But then, as people bought into the DAO, everyone had some sort of governance, right? So we were like kind of using that as a foundation for what we were thinking. We're like, okay, we want to work with entrepreneurs. How can you be a part of this DAO? What does that mean in terms of the blockchain structure? And essentially what we came up with was, well, we're gonna have to deploy a wallet so we can ingest resources, essentially create community governed fund, You know, it was like, okay, what does participatory budgeting look like for entrepreneurs? And essentially, like, okay, if you're a part of this, then how are you contributing? You know, I think most DAOs were like, okay, you can buy a token to get in, or you're investing in this project. Again, you know, we're working on entrepreneurs who need resources. So it was like, they might not necessarily have the capital, right, to buy into this DAO. So it was like, well, what can you contribute to it? You know, what kind of projects can you work on? Can you contribute, you know, your talent? Can you contribute knowledge to this? Like, you know, and it came to the larger question of like, what is this economy we're creating? So that was foundational. So as a project in the 501c3, we're like, um, there's too many barriers here because the blockchain and the compliance was
right.
it was kind of like skewing the whole vision of, well, we just want entrepreneurs to, you know, support each other.
So kind of like an accelerator.
Yeah.
Like,
We say a venture studio.
Okay,
Venture studio,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
because most of the entrepreneurs have their own either business, and there's a theme to it too. So most DAOs have a theme. Our theme for Indigidao originally was Indigenous entrepreneurs, and Indigidao would be kind of like, I guess in blockchain terms, like the layer one, right? And then we set up sub DAOs, you know. So
Oh,
it's like, okay, we spin out DAOs, and then they set up their own, you know, infrastructure. So actually, our first DAO was called ResiDAO, for Resilience DAO, and that's where all the members are. There's probably like 13 to 15 members right now, and they're all Indigenous entrepreneurs. They're all using like technology in some way. They're also in their communities. They're community leaders. Some of them are artists. Some of them are farmers. But the idea is like, can they all support each other and help grow each other's venture, right? And the idea with the DAO again too is like, if we can get resources and people invest in this venture studio, then collectively they can make decisions around this fund on who needs this resource or whatever. But then there can be transactions tracked too as well, and maybe we can tokenize that. So I need marketing. Okay, well, you know, maybe Joseph, you can help with some marketing for me, and then I can contribute something else too, right? You know,
Yeah, that's really interesting.
it's a really, you know, there's so many concepts that drive this, right? There's the circular economy. There's regenerative economics around all of this. You know, it goes back to like how, you know, like how are resources managed. So yeah, so you know, all of this, again, going back to, okay, our structure. So we're trying to get this housed in the nonprofit, but the wallet was too much. So we're like, okay, well, we might have to look outwards and start our own like corporate entity. So there is actually a bunch of DAO entity structures. Wyoming
DAO, I heard
Wyoming
about
DAO
that.
has a DAO LLC structure.
Okay,
They also have another one called the DUNA, which is a DAO unincorporated nonprofit association. Colorado has the legislation as well too. And then actually we were looking at the Catawba Nation, which is a tribe out in North Carolina. They actually have their own digital economic zone. So essentially, you know, they're kind of digital economic zone. So they were saying they're kind of like an alternative to Delaware and all the delcos. So you set up your digital entity, and essentially you become a digital member of their tribe as well too. So that was kind of appealing to us because we're like, okay, yeah, you know, indigenous kind of like, you know, infrastructure as well too. So we were exploring all of that, and I think, you know, this project started around 2 years ago. What happened is we're still a project in the nonprofit. Um, how we have our wallet solution is basically each member has their own wallet now, so we don't have an institutional wallet. Governance is a big thing as well too, because we're like, okay, well, how do we make decisions even on like how do we move forward? Because like a bunch of these things on the design, it's fully open source, right? It's like, okay, let's make a decision on this structure. Let's even like, okay, our branding, like we're fully like open to all these decisions. Right now we pretty much use, you know, consensus. You know, we haven't got to the point or where we're even using quadratic voting, which is, you know, very much blockchain-ish and DAO-ish as well. So we're doing consensus-based voting.
So, uh, let's try to unpack that for a second.
Yeah.
You know, okay, so you're talking about a little bit about how you guys have a group of people, and they basically are like a cohort, right? And so I love the solution that you guys are using, because this is almost like a means to distribute funds between people.
That's exactly it, man.
Right?
Yeah.
You ingest the funds, like you said, and distribute it out to people, and the transparency of what they're going to be using it for can be obviously validated,
100%,
right?
100%.
All that kind of stuff. So not necessarily, you know, them being on chain, but them getting distributions on chain, tracked, and then, you know, obviously they can do what they need to do with their funds. But so explain to me how the board, I guess, is it like a board of directors on chain kind of thing, or like what is that like? The members are the
Yeah, every member has a say. So when we first started the DAO, we incorporated on DAO House, which is an open source blockchain platform. The protocol, it's a layer 2 Ethereum. I'm not sure, I can't recall exactly what it is. But we had a smart contract, so everyone had governance tokens. As long as you had a token, you know, that represented kind of like your voting power.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Right.
You know, so we did try that for a little bit, and actually we had some funds as well too. So we were but going back to our earlier conversation, there's a learning curve, man.
Right.
You know,
Right.
for people to sign up for a wallet, convert, you know, crypto into fiat USD,
Onboard,
offboard. You know, so a big thing that, you know, what we encountered was we really wanted the efficiency as well too, and I still believe that can happen, but at the moment it doesn't really meet the exact needs of us right now. So we definitely we transitioned off chain, but we definitely want to be on chain. We definitely want to be on chain. And you know, there is actually, it's really interesting because our entrepreneurs, they're actually because they're all technologists in this DAO. They want a crypto portfolio. They want to invest in other coins. So there is a utility where we are going to have our venture studio, but they want to be straight up like exploring crypto as well too, as a way to generate, you know, funds as well too. So I think for us, again, over the last year and a half, like exploring what does it mean to be on chain, the educational, you know, like resources needed to fully understand that and to operate and to build out the community infrastructure. How do we make decisions? Like this is community building.
These are all tough questions, like problems to have, really.
Yeah, the community building and the community engagement is almost as complex as the technology in itself, even 100%. Not even using the technology.
The marketing aspect and the community building is always, I think, it's probably even more important than the technology stack.
100%.
It's crazy because, like, you know, I make apps on my spare time.
Yeah.
Anybody can make an app nowadays, but how do you get people in front of the app, or get the app in front of people, I should say?
Yeah.
And you know, how do you get users?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I can make the same app as Instagram, but obviously it's not gonna be type of network that Instagram has.
Yeah.
Or the type of like power it has, you know, because of the network effect, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, getting back to that too, I think the onboarding and offboarding is also one of the highest friction points in crypto. You know, especially when you have things in the real world, like you said, farmers, they need to have money, they need to have the cash to use in their business. How do you guys solve that solution then?
Yeah.
Like,
so
if you could wave a magic wand, you know.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, right? So I think again it's all around framing like what we are as a community, and again that what is this structure. So there's a community of practice that we're adjacent to called the BioFi project, and the whole intention of that community is looking at new financial facilities, specifically based for kind of like land stewardship projects in different bioregions. But one of their models that they are proposing is this bioregional venture studio and using a DAO structure again too. So I think for us, it's like you said, how are we promoting this as a community resource? So how do we even start up a seed fund for this? That is like the big thing. I think we have to look at our capital stack as well too, because you know, for the work that we're proposing, there are solutions outside that we can look at, right? There's grants, there's a lot of community development grants, even in the current landscape as well too. And then there are, you know, potential donors that we could really engage around this, especially coming from community development and community engagement, right? Okay. Like, again, we're this is all about infrastructure and, you know, for communities, for long-term sustainability and social equity. So I think for us, like the solution right now is, like, how do we really position ourselves, right, as a community that we want to be the model for other communities on how they economically model themselves. And a lot of it is just messaging about, you know, again, how do we create systems that people can support each other? What does that look like? But I think for us, it's the venture studio. I'm not sure if I answered your question, by the way, too.
Yeah, I think you did. And, you know, it's it's kind of what we were trying to do as well. We're trying to create like a cohort of farmers, producers here in Hawaii,
Yes,
and
man.
then keep it
Yes.
where you can show people. We come back to money, right?
Yeah.
Like the local economy here is obviously you have dollars coming into
Yeah.
Hawaii,
Yeah.
but how many times can that dollar circulate to the economy? The health of the dollar, the velocity of that dollar going through the economy, is really what keeps the money here. How
Yeah.
many times can you keep it in Hawaii before it has to leave?
Yeah.
So obviously it's going to leave at a certain point because of so many things that we get brought in here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
extracting out of our economy here. And so how can we keep more dollars here in Hawaii? How can you prove that you're buying local? How can you prove that your products are made in Hawaii using other products that are made in Hawaii? That kind of thing, right?
100%, man. And I think again, you nailed it with the hunters, because that is a cooperative. So again, going back to like Indigidao's hypothesis, we know these economic cooperatives already exist in communities, especially in indigenous communities or someplace like Hawaii, right? Like there are people who are mobilizing themselves and mobilizing resources, but how are they governing themselves, right?
Right.
And what are they using as tools, right? So again, we were just trying to add the tech layer to things that already exist, right?
Right.
But once you start doing that, then you start entering these larger conversations of like, okay, what is an alternative economy? What does an alternative currency look like?
Right.
Like for the farmers, essentially, like if there's a supply chain and there is something where they're governing themselves, there should be some kind of infrastructure around that, right?
Right.
How are they making decisions collectively?
Right,
Yeah,
right,
who gets to
right.
participate in the supply chain? You know what I mean? Like even outside of the hunters, these are questions that are really important because, it's a larger system for Hawaii. It's an
Right.
alternative economy, right?
That's
And
really interesting to
yeah,
put that out. Yeah, it's really true though. That's like spot on,
Mhm.
really what it is. Right?
Yeah.
I think, think about it like even in an automations workflow, it's hard to automate a process that doesn't even have a process.
There's a lot of Kanaka knowledge around all of that as well too. And working with indigenous communities, like blockchain has been an access point for that. How do you protect culture? And if you're looking at alternative economies, there is something, and I think I mentioned this on our panel, like for the enterprise commoditization of culture for data assets, right?
Okay.
And especially, we were just talking about AI so much, right?
Right.
And there is going to be a convergence of all this technology at one point.
Oh, I totally agree.
But yeah, and
totally
blockchain
agree.
is just going to be the infrastructure. We were talking about that too, right? But everyone is going to be represented in some type of language model or something. But what is the accurate representation? Do communities even want to participate in that too? Technically that is some interesting way to look at some economic model, but it's a cultural representation. So if a community wants their culture to be represented accurately, then again, everything from land stewardship, farming methods, language, symbols, like all these can be protected, and it's essentially data. And how do you participate in that economy? Or do you, but it has to be stored somewhere as well too.
I think that is what you talked about.
Data trust, right?
And that's really something to really think about too. I think a lot of people, that's a second nature to people. Like a lot of people just, especially here in Hawaii, they want to opt out of everything.
Yeah, man.
They just want to be against a lot of the change and whatnot. And it's interesting that you say that, because it's like the decentralized ethos of things. You have to participate in these types of things to have a stake in it, right? In the future.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of utility. I know we talked about a lot, but I feel like it all converges, and it goes back to, again, one thing, at least, from what I've learned in Indigidao, trying to set up the structure around a community governed, essential organization. What is the tech layer for tool? Where does the blockchain come in? It all comes back to community and education, and it takes like a lot of like talk stories like this, or seeing like, okay, where are the access points that we can have these conversations, and where does it make sense? What is the real utility around all this? What are all of our roles in like using this technology? And it's really interesting too. I mean, essentially for like, again, Indigidao, like becoming a philosophy, another thing we've just like come to is like, essentially, how do we become more human? We could talk about all this advanced technology, but like, does it really strengthen our relationships with each other? Because that was the big thing for the DAO. Could a community really support each other? Can we create digital space where they support each other that is reflected in real life community? Can we become more human? And that is the big thing around all of this too, man. what are the values that are driving all of this? You
I
know?
love that. Yeah, that's good, great points you bring up. You know, as more of our lives become more digital, things become more online. It's how can we have these connections with people
Yes.
over this longer, ethos of the internet. Being interconnected at all times, right?
Yes.
Having access to almost everybody. It kind of makes us numb to that aspect, right? Socially, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
really interesting
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
bring
yeah.
that up,
We
though.
have to live in the past, understand the existing knowledge systems that can help influence the design and the deployment of technology, and essentially we have to live in the future too. So it's interesting, like, when you think about it from that, like a lot of the things we do, because I mean, that's why I really love this project, because we work with a lot of indigenous knowledge holders, kupuna researchers, like PhDs who have dedicate their whole career to indigenous knowledge research. So we hang out a lot in the quantum realm as well too. Like we're talking a lot about, like, spiritually, what does this mean
Right.
and what does it mean?
Interesting.
And I feel like, again, this is a perfect place for the blockchain conversation, because you have to have a vision again, right?
Interesting.
You have to be like, okay, what is the future that we want, and how do we use this to create that future? And will it help humanity eventually?
Right. That's great insight.
You're doing all of it already though, bro. The education, the community, and
I mean,
you
we're
have a
trying.
vessel, right now too,
Yeah.
the Pacific blockchain.
I mean, it's really hard for us to get traction because of that, though. Right now, a lot of people, like I said, they're more interested in AI and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
That how can it make me more productive? How can I do
yeah,
more things with this? And then, it's kind of like the flashy thing right now,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which is
yeah,
fine. But like you said, I think these two things converge, right? Where sooner or later we're gonna need some way to identify people,
yeah,
like deep fakes.
yeah.
For instance,
That,
everything now, especially what Malama Carbon's doing too. Call them. They're
yeah,
they
yeah, yeah,
you know
yeah,
they're
yeah.
they're basically tokenizing their data and selling it back to people. So
Yes.
essentially, they just connect these IoT devices up to nodes, and then they
Yep.
just print out they just timestamp their data, and then they sell it to polluters. That's kind of like wild to me.
I love that, and that is another thing I'm really interested in. Is kind of like, it is, again, the convergence and like living future is not. It's actually the near future, like very right now. Like we need to set up this infrastructure. Like, what do like local computers look like? Like a local data server, having communities, again, going back to digital and data sovereignty. If they're governing their own computers, they're using, local compute, all that data is going to be their own. You're not on enterprise solution. And then again, what is economic sovereignty? You have the ability as a community to decide, do you want to participate in this? If you do, what is appropriate? You know, can there be some benefits, economic benefits for your participation in this, right? But it's all around data storage. Um, and I feel like that is something as well too. Once communities start to set up essentially, their own data servers, local like laptops, literal laptops that can store everything, that changes the whole conversation. Because then a community is really deciding their own economic, future.
Interesting. That's interesting that you say that. Could you kind of like elaborate more about like their own like you're talking about owning their data?
Owning their own data, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, owning their own data. So literally, again, going back to what is important for a community and how they're represented. I think you brought the deep fake issue is a big thing, right? So if you really want to accurately represent yourself or your community, or elements of a culture, to have accurate data to train these language models, right?
Interesting. Yeah,
So there
that's
needs
true.
to be data that's sourced, whether that's from the elders, the community themselves, the language holders, the knowledge holders. It needs to be validated. So that can be the community who's collecting all these data, validating it. And you need to store it somewhere. It needs to be stored on something, hardware, like literal hardware, right? A data server, a data warehouse. But the technology right now, I think, especially with the advancement of, compute, and that's how we got AI. These laptops can hold their own language models, right?
Right. Right.
A local language model. We're not even talking about large language model. We're talking about local language models. You can store it on that too, and you can protect it with blockchain. You can have that immutable layer on
Right.
it,
Right.
where it can be governed by a DAO. It can be governed by another community governed structure, and you have full control over that. And if an enterprise model really wants to be accurate, they're going to need buy-in from all these communities. So if each community has their own control, that changes the economics around all
I
of this.
see, I see, I see, I
You
see.
know, like
That's so crazy to
the
think
go to
about
market
that.
on a large language model right now, the community is not part of these conversations.
That's so interesting that you put that way, because like it literally is like how anyone would want to own their own data.
Exactly.
But in a sense of for everyone in your community,
Everyone.
for the cultural appropriation and that kind to avoid all of that kind of
Yeah.
misunderstanding things like that. And I think that's kind of what a lot of them guys are doing with
Yep.
how they are putting their
100%.
the stories and the cultural like you know just the cultural like teachings of the people there on chain, you know.
100%. Shout out to Alana Kanahela.
Yeah.
And that's what she's doing that with smart contracts. So again, the different instruments to help protect that, it's all blockchain elements as well too, right? Like we probably don't have enough time to talk about data trust and smart contracts, but these are part of these protocols that can help protect data even more, right? Can ensure this sovereignty over it, you know. And again, what is the utility of the data? So, you know, how do we go again from onboarding someone with a wallet to show them this represents your whole digital identification, your digital ID, which is going to be huge, because that's going to be essentially how you navigate economically in the future.
Right.
You know, everything, biodiversity data, all these things are, you know, the larger community isn't aware of a lot of these things, but already we're participating in these economies without even knowing it.
Yeah.
You know,
100%. And I think like, you know, nowadays with AI too, it's becoming more and more important for them to aggregate good data.
Yeah.
Properly sourced data. And obviously blockchain is metadata. It's like it's literally data on chain, like source data, validated, and you know, it can be cleaned and whatnot too. So it's like almost like it just goes hand in hand with it. You know,
it goes hand in hand, man. And again, I think
it's just like the natural evolution of these things are just converged together, like you said, with everything here.
Yeah.
It's just I don't think people see that bigger picture.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to Skylar. Like, what is going to be the utility of blockchain? It is going to be the infrastructure. It's going to be the infrastructure behind a lot of things. I think like even the way cities are operating, like actual infrastructure for a city, we look at, you know, like smart cities, the Internet of Things, all of this whole like physical infrastructure is going to be needed to run on data. How are you going to store all that data? Blockchain, you know, like blockchain is the vessel to hold all this amount of data and protect it, you know, where it can't be compromised. It's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see like, you know, where we go and the life cycles around blockchain and what it went from the beginning, the hype to real utility to actual deployment on a large scale as infrastructure, which I believe is the conversation, because we were talked about that at the summit too, right? On the infrastructure. And I believe that's going to be like the narrative at some point. Again, it's going to take education, especially education on, you know, key decision makers, i.e. government, you know, as well. Like, do they understand the full deployment event, what that looks like? But that's what it's going to take, because then, yeah, essentially cities will be run on blockchain in some capacity. You know.
And then I think, you know, like with just the whole rise of AI right now.
Yeah, AI is going to be it's an access point. It's an access point. AI data.
It's just it's all data.
It's all data.
It's all metadata nowadays, especially too with the agents. You know.
Yeah.
With the birth of agents now and how they can be actual part of the, you know, a citizen in the digital economy as well. You know, within this whole realm of being a consumer and a producer as well. It's just like you know, with them having wallets, they can transact and do all these kind of other things. It's just like wild.
Yeah, I'm interested in the agent conversation, which I haven't seen. I've only seen like Web 2 on validation, but I'm sure already people are doing it already. Like how do agents validate on chain? You know, like that's, I don't know, because it's complex. It's complex. So, and again, go back to community. How does community match the velocity of product development and product deployment? You know, there has to be an approach for the community where they can sort of manipulate time so they can adopt these technologies where it makes sense to them and it can be, you know, implemented in an appropriate way. So there is something, again, on the time and all of this. And, you know, I think interesting, you lived in the Bay Area, you know, I lived there. And again, you know, way back to like product development and like Silicon Valley and the velocity of that, and even AI, the velocity of large language models being like, where is the community in this, and how can communities almost manipulate that so they can be on community time? Well, it gives sovereignty over everything. So if they're controlling their own computer, then they're on community time, and then they can sort of like start to dictate and manipulate these go-to-market timelines and product velocity, and then it's a different conversation, really, because then community is an essential part of this as well.
Right,
you
right.
know.
Yeah, I think, coming back down to it, it always comes back to the community, like
Yeah.
you said, because it's like all of these things are just tools, right? And without that, community to hold everything together, what the values that everyone shares,
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing. Because I seen it already with NFTs.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
NFT, as much as a bubble as that was, you seen people just go like super hard on the narrative,
Yeah.
and they just went all in on that thing,
Mhm.
and they believed that so hard,
Yeah.
and that's what made these super crazy evaluations for these these basically NFTs of just pictures of just monkeys or whatever. People really believed it as a cult religion almost.
Oh yeah. No, it's great.
And it just goes to show you the power of the community.
It-
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you brought up an important thing, because there is something though here with the culture around blockchain and the community. Like Satoshi's white paper is it's I mean, it's a great read. Like, I love it, but like people live and die by that thing,
Oh,
man.
people do.
It's like it's
do.
a Bible, right?
Yeah,
It's the white
for sure.
paper, So there is something to understanding that, where again, how does that community transfer over to the community we're talking about? What is the interoperability amongst this? The interoperability amongst tech and in real life community building, and again, I truly believe that's where it is. So again, what are the areas and regions you can deploy it in? You need to be in some place like Hawaii where community is strong already.
Right.
Again, where they can understand, okay, this is just a tool.
That's
The
that blew my
interoperability of
mind
tech,
right there.
the interoperability of tech and community, because yeah, these concepts, again, they're very complex. And if you have something that people have bought into around, like again, Satoshi's white paper, which is it's a pretty tech heavy,
Yeah, it's very-
document.
it's-
Yeah. But even if you understand the foundational concept of it, and alternative currencies or what it could build,
Right.
it can like turn the light bulb onto something,
Right.
And that's what you have to do, right? That is, how do you inspire people? How do you inspire communities, right? So there is something there with the original community who was buying those Bored Ape NFTs that we can learn from as well too, right? So again, we have to be side by side. We have to be adjacent to all them. But again, it takes like people like yourself, the leaders, the dev, to be in community now to understand the different utility of it. Because translating that tech, oh man, that's the battle right there.
Yeah. I think it's really just distilling it down for anybody to understand it and how it can help them. That's the sweet spot to be in.
Yeah.
A lot of people, like I said, we were talking earlier, and people just get turned off by the idea once you say a few jargon words down, and this and that, and people are just like
100%, 100%,
I think a lot of people just shut down. But like once you say like, oh yeah, you can actually track your productivity, these metrics or whatever, people kind of like, okay, that makes sense, if they can relate to those types of things, right? I guess.
And even for NFTs, obviously I think your project Vanishing Murals was a different utility around it, but going back to the hunters, like using an NFT as a certification, right? To show that you can participate in this, right? Again, like, okay, this coffee is certified coffee. It's an NFT as well too, right? So to be a manufacturer, you need an NFT. To support it, participate in the supply chain, you need this NFT, right, as well. Proof of knowledge as well too, right? Like, these are things that again make sense, can make sense to the larger community. It's a reframing though, right? It's not a piece of art or a Bored Ape. It's a piece of knowledge which holds a lot of value. So what does that mean again for the larger economy or an alternative economy too, right? How much are you valuing knowledge as well, or even to participate in the supply chain, right? What are the mechanisms? That's why I think NFTs will not go away, right? IP NFTs are a thing, you know. I think they just have to be deployed more. We have to find the instances to deploy them in.
Yeah, I think there has to be a little bit more translation between the real world,
Yeah.
that whole ordeal of it, because it's kind of like on the border of being, like law
Yeah.
and it's a gray line, But I think once somebody comes along and makes it a little bit more compliance based,
Yeah.
oh, it'll be, if there was an entity that accepts it as a form of proof for that, then yeah, I think people would use it more. Chain really is decentralization, teaching people about what's being decentralized, and we're working with one of our friends who he's advising us for the nonprofit itself, and he owns or he doesn't own, but he runs a whole bunch of nonprofits, and he they do a digital, no, not digital, a financial literacy that they made a storybook for in
awesome.
it's like a native Hawaiian lore kind of like storybook for kids. That teaches them about how to save money. Yeah, stuff like that. So he created this whole story.
Oh, that's neat.
And I was thinking we should do something like that, like
Yes.
how the Tuttle twins.
Yeah.
Thing, but one step at a time.
Yeah.
So we got that aspect, doing more adult teaching.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff, cohort stuff, and then we were gonna do more of like a college student kind of thing. I'm trying to work with Dagan. I don't know if you met him. But anyway, we're trying to do the summit for youth, the blockchain summit for youth blockchain summit, I should say, at UH, and we're trying to get more of the students involved because that's really where I think we're gonna make the most difference.
Yeah.
They just end up living here,
Yeah. Stay here, build the infrastructure.
Right.
I mean, everything is going to be decentralized too, right? So even these larger knowledge bases or data as well, you're going to need local data, nodes that tap into larger things. And, again, maybe the larger server is located somewhere like the Internet Archive where it's fully decentralized and the ethos of that is fully for the public. But you have nodes everywhere, like these local, libraries or whatever, archives, that they're storing things on. And again, you're going to need people to build on that. You're going to need people to create. That's where the jobs can come from. Get the youth involved in that, man.
I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Richard, for coming on.
Yes.
This has been a really insightful to, connect with him. I don't know, you can drop your social.
Yeah. Look at me on LinkedIn, Richard Ng, last name NG. Indigidao website still being built out. But LinkedIn is the best place. Or Richard at indigidao.org, INDIGIDAO.org. And yeah, email me and I'll always email back.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Richard, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Like and subscribe.